This is Karen. This is Karen.
Karen, sorry,
Okay.
Karen.
It's
I'm looking
okay.
at you thinking, I know you, I know you, I know you. You've got two last names hanging up there
Oh, I'm sorry.
on your
Yeah, I
Zoom.
do. I do. I should have renamed. Sorry.
No
Um,
worries.
so I'm working on Practical Joy again. So I'm on block 7.
Okay.
And I'm having a lot of fun, but I have to say I find uh making the borders very tedious. And so since I'm a quilter, I wondered if can I just make the borders as flying geese? And will the dimensions work if I just want to sew them straight?
You can do whatever you want. And it just so happens, I'm going to show you the other wall here because I have the other Practical Joy. And this particular one, we didn't piece the borders at all.
Ah,
So that's just plain
yeah,
strips of fabric on the borders. And
yeah.
interestingly enough, because of the quilting on them, you it once you get up close to it, I'm not sure if I can get the camera up close enough that you can see, but the um I'm tied to the computer by a cord here.
Right, right.
Um the quilting on it, you can what do I want to say here? You can
It gives it some depth.
create the effect
Yeah,
of the piecing, especially if you had a much more high contrast thread
right, right.
than we used. Another option that you might think about is for the triangle blocks. So it was the green borders and the pink borders, which have those piece triangles. And I have to say, yes, they do take forever. Um, you could just put them as squares.
Oh, yeah, that would have been,
So the yellow
yeah,
borders have squares.
right,
Now, I wouldn't necessarily actually literally make them squares, but if you look at the size of the triangle blocks, um,
yes,
and just have the different colors going as squares, rectangles, that kind of thing,
right, right. Yeah, yeah, good. That's a good suggestion.
and then that would
So I,
limit because they are essentially flying geese that you're making. They're just in different directions. Because
right,
the triangles are pretty much flying geese blocks. They're a bit funky because there's a little bit of extra height on them to accommodate for the borders and the quilting and what have you.
right. Yeah. So they're not symmetrical when
Right.
they're not symmetrical.
They're not symmetrical, no.
Yeah,
They're kind of
yeah.
like unsymmetrical flying geese, if you like.
But they're still in a row. So I have
Yes.
two other questions. Have you ever used Misty Fuse instead of Heat and Bond?
Yes. And um let's see, what was it? What did soft fuse. One of the challenges with Misty Fuse, especially if you want to use a cutting machine, is that it doesn't have any backing paper.
Right. That's right.
Um,
Yeah, that would be a problem.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I use when we were using the Aquaquilt Go dies, I used to love using soft fuse,
Uh-huh.
which was essentially the same as Misty Fuse, but it was on a backing paper. Why did that not like going through the cutting machine? I don't remember because we stopped using soft fuse. Um, I can't remember why, but we because we used
I,
a lot of soft fuse prior to the cutting machines when we were using the Go dies. Um, I don't know if that again was something with the backing paper and it wouldn't
It's
stay
just
on.
it makes it much heavier.
Yeah,
So
it's one of
I,
those things where there's like pros and cons.
yeah,
Um, the soft fuse definitely was a much lighter fusible and much more supple and flexible in the finished product versus the heat and bond, which is definitely heavier. But the heat and bond, if you're using an electronic cutter machine, is going to give you a much better result than the soft fuse.
right, right.
And the Misty fuse kind of got ruled out because it didn't have any backing paper, which for the kind of applique that we're doing tended to have problems.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a long
Okay.
time since I've thought about that.
Yeah, I recently was thinking about it, not using one of your designs, but I was doing a baby quilt with applique and I said, yeah, I don't want to use heat and bond. So I used Misty Fuse and I'm trying to remember, I did use the cutting machine, so I'm trying to remember why it worked. It makes sense to me that it would be a problem, but I'll have to
Huh.
try it again. It did
Yeah.
work. I did use my Cricut. So
On the subject of cricket, whilst what just because you set up a reminder, somebody commented on the Facebook group, the Cricut design space software seems to have changed
yes,
within the last month. I can't remember whether it was, I think it was when we were working preparing the Magic is in You appliques. It was almost a case of if I'd written the date down, I could have told you exactly when it changed because one day I was pulling SVG files in. They came in at 12 inches, just shipped them up to 00, and everything was fine. The next day,
right,
I had made a change or something or other, and I pulled the file in, and all of a sudden it's like 100 and who knows what inches. So I'm like,
right,
what in the
yes,
world has happened here? So for anybody who does have a Cricut Maker, when you're using the SVG files, remember that all of our SVG files have a 12-inch box around them because of Cricut and their every now and then thing where everything totally resizes itself. But as long as you've got everything selected and you've set the dimensions to 12 inches by 12 inches, you should be good. But yeah, Cricut has definitely done something in the last
yeah.
couple of
I did
weeks.
have that problem. Although I also had the problem, even when I resized it, sometimes it would say the image is too big, and I would have to do them singly or drop some
You
off
have to
the
make
combine.
sure that you actually ungroup everything and delete that 12-inch box.
Okay, so resize it to 12 inches,
Select all,
ungroup. Yeah.
yes, select all, resize it, and then ungroup, delete the 12-inch block or the 12-inch square, and then select all and attach.
Okay. I
Yeah,
think I
because
was
if you keep that 12-inch square on there, then it will be too big for the cutting mat.
okay. I was deleting it, but I wasn't ungrouping it when I deleted it.
Well, that would have deleted everything.
No, you go down the side and you just select the blue box and
Huh.
delete it, and then you're left with the black boxes.
Okay. Yeah, I typically ungroup, delete, and then group again and attach.
Okay, I'll try that with the next one.
Okay. Yeah, because
And
they should all be, as long as you've got everything selected and the square is 12 inches, and make sure that it's in the 00 position
right,
because
yeah.
it comes in at half an inch,
Uh,
half an inch.
yeah. Um, And then my final question is, I don't have digitizing software, and I was just wondering, can I take one of the designs, one of the quilting designs, and use it for edge-to-edge quilting by just resizing it?
Which quilting designs are you thinking about?
I don't know. I'm just musing out loud without redigitizing.
Well,
I
okay, so
have,
for the quilting design, so let's say Transformation Quilting Collection or Rejoice. That has Rejoice Quilting Collection actually has some good end-to-end designs in there. And for the
oh, okay.
quilting designs, yes, you can resize because there's really nothing that you can do to do any damage. The reason I don't like resizing applique shapes is because your edge finishing stitches, whether it's a satin stitch or a candle wicking stitch or a stem stitch or whatever it might be, is going to shrink it, especially if you shrink stuff, which most people seem to want to do. It's going to get too small to actually cover nicely.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and we also have, and you'll learn about this in the free digitizing class on Friday or Thursday, anybody who comes, that we have a very specific amount of distance between the edge of the applique shape and the edge of the satin stitch, let's say, if you're using a satin stitch. And if you're going to shrink the design, that specific measurement is also going to shrink as well. Quilting designs, because they're just single stitch, you can shrink them or enlarge them pretty much as you want to, even in the machine. Which machine are you stitching on? I can see it right
The
there.
Bernina 770.
Okay, and that more than likely is going to rejig the stitches anyway, depending on how you. Aren't there a couple of different ways that you can do the resizing?
Yes, you can do it uniform or just the horizontal or just the vertical.
But I was thinking more in terms of what sometimes when you resize, the machine will actually recalculate the stitches.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
That it's ringing bells, but it's not bringing a huge amount of clarity. I don't know if anybody else has a better memory than I do about reason. I know that for some of the Boninas, when you resize the design, it will actually recalculate the stitches for you, which
In
might
other
be a
words,
problem in them.
that makes them larger or smaller, the
Yeah.
actual
Well,
stitch length.
if you think about it, if you've got let's say you've got a quilting design and the stitch length is set to 2.5 millimeters.
Yeah,
If you were to shrink that, then if it's shrinking the stitch length proportionally, let's say you shrank it to 50% of the size, and if it's shrinking the stitch length with it, then your 2.5 millimeters is now going to be 1 1/8 millimeter. Versus
right.
if it recalculates the stitches, then it would maintain the stitch length even though you shrunk the design.
I have not seen that option on the 770, but I haven't played around with that so much, so I'll have to try it
Gloria
out.
Gloria is actually in the face in watching on Facebook and said, "Isn't that done in your software program?" And yes, you definitely can do that in the software program, which incidentally in MEL Club for our motifs that you can use for quilting, I've taken to providing you with a 2 millimeter long stitch single stitch length and a 3 millimeter long stitch length. Because if in software, if you change the size of the motif, it's going to retain the stitch length. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes you want to make it different. Karen says her Bernina 790 reduces the number of stitches, which isn't necessarily the same as changing the stitch length. I might need to go and do some experimenting here.
Right.
I honestly can't remember. To be honest with you, never actually resize anything in my embroidery machine. I always do it in the software, but it is,
Okay,
like she's saying, it doesn't change the stitch length. It's just going to reduce
mm,
the number of stitches. So,
that would be good for a quilting motif.
well, that also depends. That also depends because if you have, for instance, a 3 millimeter stitch length and you've got a design that is, say, 3 millimeters and it's got lots of curves in it, but not 3 millimeters. If you've got a design that's, say, 3 inches by 3 inches and it's got a 3 millimeter stitch length, let's say a spiral. If you were to shrink that 50% and still keep the 3 millimeter stitch length, your spiral that might be nice and smooth in its shrunk size with the same stitch length is now going to look fairly jagged.
Right, right. Yeah. Okay.
So you
Hmm.
can change the quilt, you can change the size of a quilting design in the software, but beware, know what your machine is doing to the stitches,
Right,
which might
right.
require a little bit of experimenting.
Okay. And I'm going to experiment with the Misty Fuse and the Cricut because I'm pretty sure I was successful. So I'm going to try it a
Okay.
little more.
Because
Um,
Misty View doesn't come on any kind of a backing, does it?
no, it does not.
So how do you apply it in the first place to the back of your applique fabric?
Um, oh, that's a good, how did I do that?
Getting a piece of parchment paper?
Yes, I mean, I used parchment paper to adhere it. And I think then I ran it through the machine. And then when I heated it up again, it was enough to fuse it.
Okay.
So it went through the machine without damaging it. But
That might,
I have to say, I ran into a completely unrelated problem where I didn't have vector drawings. And so when you run it through the Cricut and port it in, it interprets the line as two lines,
hmm.
right? So I was pulling off tiny little pieces of yeah, it was a mess. But the Misty Fuse worked. So I'll have to play with it a little more
Okay. Yeah, let me know what happens when you
because
try
I'm
again.
actually thinking about using a Cricut for a different design that's pretty intricate, but I wanted it to be a soft outcome, so I was going to use Misty Fuse for that. I'm also going to look for you said it was called Soft Fuse.
Soft fuse. Yes, and I
Yeah.
haven't seen that in a long time. The other
Yeah.
interesting thing about the soft fuse was that they wouldn't ship it in the heat of the summer because
Oh,
the heat will melt it.
that seems like a
Which,
very limiting factor.
it is, especially if you live in Phoenix.
Right. Right.
It's kind of like that there's an online store called Brain MD that I get some of my supplements from, and they have really good chocolate, but they won't ship in the summer because the chocolate melts by the time it's gotten to you, which is like, okay, fair
Right.
enough.
Yeah. 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 I could not live there and be in my wine clubs because we don't want them to ship in the summer.
I don't think it stops them here. But anyway, let me know how you get on with the Misty Fuse. I'm
I
interested
will.
to find that out.
Okay. Thank you.
It's good to chat with you, Karen.